The oceans hide secrets that could sometimes take centuries to uncover. One such secret was revealed recently after 375 years of searching. Researchers discovered the 8th continent of the world, which had been hiding in plain sight for almost 4 centuries. While we might think we know enough about our oceans, it seems we haven't been very thorough. Mysteries about this hidden landmass steeply exceed how much we know. How did it become to be? What was it like there before? And how long has it been underwater? Let's find out. The year was 1642, and Abel Tasman was on a mission. A flamboyant mustache, bushy goatee, and penchant for rough justice were displayed by the experienced Dutch sailor, who later tried to hang some of his crew on a drunken whim. He was convinced of the existence of a vast empire. Europeans were still largely unaware of this portion of the globe at the time, but they believed there must be a large landmass there, preemptively named Terra Australis, to balance out their own. The idea had been around for centuries, but it was only now that they were going to find out if it worked. On August 14th of that year, Tasman set sail with 2 small ships from his company's base in Jakarta, Indonesia. They went west, south, and east, and eventually landed up at the South Island of New Zealand. He encountered the local Maori people, who are believed to have settled there several centuries earlier. On day 2, numerous paddled out on a canoe and rammed a small boat that was passing messages between the Dutch ships. 4 Europeans died. Later, the Europeans fired a cannon at 11 more canoes, but they don't know what happened to them. That was the end of his mission. Tasman named that fateful location Moordenaars, or Murderers Bay, with little sense of irony, and sailed home numerous weeks later, even without having set foot on this new location. He thought he had found the great southern continent, but it wasn't the commercial utopia he had thought it would be. He did not return. By this time, Australia was already known about, but the Europeans believed it was not the legendary continent they were looking for. The name was changed when they changed their minds and named it after Terra Australis. Tasman was correct all along. There was a missing continent. In 2017, a group of geologists made headlines when they announced their discovery of Zealandia, which means Te Reo Amaui in the Maori language. The continent is about 6 times bigger than Madagascar. It is 1.89 million square miles, or 4.9 million square kilometers. Even though many encyclopedias, maps, and search engines had been adamant that there were only 7 continents for some time, the team confidently informed the world that it was wrong. As the smallest, tiniest, and youngest in the world, the latest edition breaks all the records. The problem is that 94% of it is underwater, with only a handful of islands, such as New Zealand, thrusting out of its oceanic depths. It has been hiding in plain sight for the entire time. Andy Tulloch, a geologist at the New Zealand Crown Research Institute GNS Science, who was part of the team that discovered Zealandia, said in a statement, "This is an example of how something very obvious can take a while to uncover. The continent is as mysterious as ever, its secrets guarded beneath 6,560 feet of water, even after 5 years of lengthy research. The truth about us not knowing much about Zealandia is because the hidden continent has always been difficult to study. James Cook, the British mapmaker, was sent on a scientific voyage to the southern hemisphere more than a century after Tasman discovered New Zealand. His mission was to observe the transit of Venus so that he could calculate how far away the sun is. But he also had a sealed envelope with him that he had to open when he had finished the first task. The mission was to discover the southern continent, which he allegedly sailed straight over before reaching New Zealand. The first clues of Zealandia's existence were gathered by Scottish astronomer Sir James Hector, who traveled to New Zealand in 1895 to survey a series of islands, the remnant of a mountain chain that formed the crest of a great continental area that stretched to the south, and south is now submerged, according to the geologists who study their geology. It wasn't until the 1960s that knowledge of a possible Zealandia became known. According to Nick Mortimer, a geologist at GNS Science who led the 2017 study, things happen pretty slowly in this field. It was then that geologists finally came to an agreement about what a continent is, broadly defined as an area with high elevation, wide variety of rocks, and a thick crust. Furthermore, it needs to be big. It can't just be a tiny piece. This gave geologists something to work with. If they were able to collect evidence, they could prove that the 8th continent was real. The mission stalled because it's hard and expensive to find a continent, and there wasn't a lot of urgency. Then in 1995, the American scientist Bruce Lewandike again suggested calling the region Zealandia. Tulloch describes its discovery as a curve that goes up and down. Around the same time, the United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea came into effect, and this finally gave people some serious motivation. It allows countries to extend their legal territory beyond 200 nautical miles, or about 370 kilometers from their coastlines, so they can claim their extended continental shelf with all the mineral riches and oil this encompasses. New Zealand could increase its territory by 6 times if it proved that it was part of a larger continent. The evidence gradually built up after there was an abundance of funding for trips to survey the area. With every rock sample that was taken, the case for Zealandia got better. Satellite data provided the final flourish, which can be used to track tiny variations in the Earth's gravity across different parts of the crust to map the seafloor. Using this technology, Zealandia is clearly visible as a misshapen mass that is almost as large as Australia. When the continent was finally unveiled to the world, it unlocked one of the most sizable maritime territories in the world. Mortimer reveals, it is kinda cool, if you think about it. Every continent on the planet has different countries on it, but there are only 3 territories on Zealandia. Besides New Zealand, the continent includes the island of New Caledonia, a French colony known for its dazzling lagoons, and the tiny Australian territories of Lord Howe Island and Ball's Pyramid. The latter was described by an 18th century explorer as being smaller than a boat. Zealand was originally part of the ancient supercontinent Gondwana, which was formed about 550 million years ago and essentially unified all the land in the southern hemisphere. It occupied a corner of the eastern side of the continent where it bordered several others, including half of West Antarctica and all of eastern Australia. Tulloch reveals, then around 105 million years ago, due to a process which we don't thoroughly understand yet, Zealandia started to be pulled away. The continental crust is around 40 kilometers deep, which is significantly thicker than the oceanic crust, which is around 10 kilometers. Zealandia was strained so much that its crust now only extends 20 kilometers, or 12.4 miles down. After sinking, the thin continent disappeared under the sea, though not quite to the level of the normal oceanic crust. Even though the landmass is thin and submerged, geologists are aware that Zealandia is a continent because of the kinds of rocks that are found there. While the ocean floor is usually made of igneous rocks, such as basalt, the continental crust is usually made up of metamorphic and sedimentary rocks. However, there is a lot that's unacknowledged. Geologists are particularly intrigued by the unusual origins of the 8th continent, and it can be perplexing. It is still unclear how Zealandia managed to stay together when it was so thin and not disintegrate into tiny microcontinents. A further mystery is when Zealandia ended up underwater, and whether it has ever, in fact, consisted of dry land. The ridges that are currently above sea level were formed when the Pacific and Australian plates collapsed together. Some people think that it was always submerged, and others think that it was once completely dry. This also raises the question of what was there. Gondwana was the home to a vast array of flora and fauna, including the first 4-limbed land animals with a mild climate and a 39 million square mile or 101 million square kilometer range. The Titanosaurus were the largest animals to ever live, and they could be found on Gondwana. So it could be possible that the rocks of Zealandia are full of the fossils of the animals that lived there. Fossilized land animals are rare in the southern hemisphere, but scientists found the remains of several in New Zealand in the 1990s, including the rib bone of a giant long-tailed, long-necked dinosaur, a beaky herbivore dinosaur, and an armored dinosaur. It was in the Chatham Islands that the foot bone of a large carnivore, possibly an allosaur, was discovered in 2006. It is important to note that the fossils of Zealandia split from Gondwana. The majority of Zealandia may have been sanctuaries while the rest was drowned, as it is now, but this doesn't mean that there were dinosaurs roaming over them. Rupert Sutherland, a professor of geophysics and tectonics at the Victoria University of Wellington, said in a statement, "There's a long debate about this, about whether it's possible to have land animals without continuous land, and whether without it, they would have been snuffed out." The plot thickens with the kiwi, a bird with whiskers and hair like feathers that is one of New Zealand's weirdest and most beloved inhabitants. The closest relative of the moa is not thought to be the moa, but the even more giant elephant bird, which lived on the same island until its extinction 500 years ago. But the even more giant elephant bird, which stalked the forest of Madagascar until as recently as 800 years ago. Scientists believe that both birds are descended from a common ancestor that lived in Gondwana. It took 130 million years for the supercontinent to break up, but when it did, it left behind fragments which have been since scattered all over the world, forming South America, Africa, Madagascar, Antarctica, Australia, the Arabian Peninsula, the Indian subcontinent, and Zealandia. Moreover, this suggests that at least part of the now submerged Zealandia has remained above sea level for the entire time. It is believed that around 25 million years ago, the entire continent, even possibly the entirety of New Zealand, was plunged underwater. It was believed that all the plants and animals had colonized afterward. Though it's not possible to collect fossils from the seafloor of Zealandia directly, scientists have been plumbing its depths by drilling. Sutherland stated, "Actually, the most helpful and distinctive fossils are the ones which form in the very shallow seas, because they leave a record. There are zillions and zillions of tiny, tiny little fossils that are very distinctive." In 2017, a team conducted the most extensive surveys of the region so far, drilling more than 4,101 feet, or 1,250 meters, into the seabed at 6 different sites. Pollen from land plants, spores, and shells of organisms that lived in warm, shallow seas were contained in the cores they collected. Sutherland explains, if you have water, which is only, 10 meters or 33 feet deep or something like this, then there's a good chance that there was land around as well. It is possible that Zealandia was not as submerged as thought, according to its pollen and spores. Another intriguing mystery can be found in the shape of Zealandia. There are 2 things that stand out in a geological map of New Zealand. There are plate boundaries along the South Island that can be seen from space, one of which is the Alpine Fault. Secondly, the geology of New Zealand is oddly bent, as well as that of the wider continent. The Pacific and Australian tectonic plates meet at a horizontal line, which splits them in 2. It looks like someone has taken the lower half and twisted it away so that the previously continuous ribbons of rock are almost at right angles. An easy explanation is that the plates moved and caused them to be out of shape. However, the exact cause or time of this incident is still unclear. There are many different ways to look at this, but it is a big unknown thing. Sutherland explains, the continent is unlikely to give up all of its secrets anytime soon. It's quite hard to make discoveries when everything is 2 kilometers or 1.2 miles underwater, and the layers that you need to sample are 500 meters or 1,640 feet beneath the seabed as well. It's really challenging to go out and explore a continent like that, so it just takes a lot of time, money, and effort to go out and ships and survey region. Nearly 400 years after Tasman's quest, the world's 8th continent shows that there is still a whole lot left to be unwrapped. So, what do you think? Did Zealandia really exist? What mysteries lie in the oceans around Zealandia? And what creatures could have existed on the continent? Let us know in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching Space Rumor.